Good morning and welcome to the programme. Sean O'Rourke, good morning.
How are you?
I'm wonderful, thanks. I'm wonderful. How are you keeping yourself?
I'm okay. I'm in day 3 of retirement. I appreciate maybe some of your listeners wouldn't have a clue who I am because we're busy listening to you instead of me. I mean, look, no one's perfect. But,
you can tell the truth now. That's the real reason you retired. The listenership had gone down so much from the Deise, isn't that it?
That's it. Yeah, there's a corner to the southeast. The numbers just went off the opposite. You know, they're as low as the number. I actually was, in fairness, I was looking at the map yesterday, and the coronavirus in Waterford and in Wexford is very low. Somebody is doing something right. A lot of people are doing something right in that part of the world. So
they are actually. You're right. Just make sure that the signal is okay there, Sean. It's just dropping a little bit as we know sometimes. No, you're okay. Because you were one of the first people that told me about quality and make sure the quality is important, and it's something that we're going to talk about in a second in terms of broadcasting. Yeah, no, we've an interview with Michael Thompson, one of the oldest funeral firms in the country, established firms, and they're talking about different systems in place. It's fascinating. I know Brian O'Connell does great work and has done great work with G over the years as well, and so many different reporters just trying to get underneath the surface of the story and find out why things like that happen, isn't it? It's been one of the important things regarding programmes that you've done yourself.
And you know what, Damien, you know all about this because you're a former regional correspondent. I mean, like, it's the people who are out on the ground, like Brian, as you mentioned, like Paddy O'Gorman or Evelyn O'Rourke or before them, Valerie Cox, and they're out there sort of driving between the ditches, and they're meeting the Gnawdini, and they're getting sort of to the kind of granular detail about what life is like, you know, as people are living it, or enduring it, or enjoying it, whatever the case might be, in a way that somebody sitting in the studio, as you are now, you know, you don't get that kind of detail, and they're really central to the whole thing.
They really are, yeah. One of the things I just want to mention beforehand, because people may not know this, when I was working with you on the News at One, I remember you talking about, and it's one thing that stuck me when I started this job, the importance of the billboard and the importance of getting people into the programme and getting them interested. I remember you crafting your billboards really, really well. Just explain that to the listeners.
Well, I mean, the billboard, like, for a presenter, is a bit like, you know, the window, the shop window for the butcher, you know. I mean, you put your best cuts out and you just put them up there looking as well as you can possibly make them. And it's about inviting people into the shop in the days where people could go into the shop and not just stand at the door. And, I mean, it's a funny thing. I suppose the training and the discipline over 25 years of doing it day by day. I mean, sometimes, like when I was on the news at 1, I wouldn't start right until a minute past 1. But, I mean, in an ideal world, you might be delayed because it was a breaking story. But in an ideal world, you should be writing and then maybe spend 5 or 10 minutes at it. But circumstances sometimes, would mean that you'd have to rush it. But somebody reminded me last week, the former president of the IFA, about one that led to me getting into terrible trouble with the Broadcasting Complaints Commission. It was in the middle of a row about the price of beef or something like that in the World Trade Organization, and the former Taoiseach was Minister of Finance, and my billboard line was, you know, agreement reached in World Trade talks, but did Biffo blink? And somebody complained about me, and there was a full hearing, and we had this guy called Peter Feeney, who you'd know. Yes. Peter was brilliant. He was our advocate, and he got me out of a bit of trouble more than once. Sometimes he might have been lucky to get me out of trouble, but he made a case that, look, you know, it was the alliterative value, Biffo and blink. It was a term of endearment and all the rest of it. So we escaped any sanction on that one. But yeah, you have to summarise the story. It's a bit like a headline in the newspaper, same thing, you know. And you invite people in, and you just try to if you like, grab their interest. One
of the stories that is at the heart of what you've done over the years is your trip to South Africa in 1994, and just remind our listeners about 1994 in South Africa.
Well, it was the first time democratic elections were held in South Africa, and there was the apartheid system, white majority rule for going back to the turn of the previous century and beyond. And anyway, there was a lot of it was a big world story. Would apartheid end, and if it did, how would it end? And okay, the key to the beginning of the end was the release from jail of Nelson Mandela in 1990 by F.W. de Klerk, and gradually there were peace talks took place leading up to democratic elections, which opened the way for majority rule and Mandela becoming the president. And it was a massive story, and RTE sent 3 people from the newsroom to cover it. I think questions and answers went separately, and maybe Fergal Keane as well for Radio News or for radio. And Brian Dobson and Charlie Bird were going down, and Shane Kenny was supposed to go. Shane was a legendary presenter and editor of This Week and News at One and that. And anyway, Shane was struck by some illness or other and was told, you cannot travel. And literally about 2 weeks before he was due to go, I get a phone call. I'm planting spuds in my back garden. And the great question everybody would love to be asked is your passport in order? And it was, of course. And so I found myself taking his files and heading down there, working to his programme of events, interviews, and so forth. And we did 5 live shows out of there. It was a fantastic occasion. You really got the sense that you were in on world history. And
yes,
that you were witnessing something of great significance.
And let's have a little surprise for you, Sean. So on the other line, I think we've got Brian Dobson. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning, Damien. Good morning, Sean. How are you?
No, hang on. I've been ambushed.
And then I think we don't have Ireland's RTE's Fergal Keane. We also have the BBC Fergal Keane on the other line. Good morning, Fergal Keane.
Good morning. How are you, Sean?
This is a total ambush.
The doorstep from hell.
Two guys who worked for the BBC, and I'm up against them.
Well, we were talking about South Africa, and I was looking at that marvellous article you did in the interview on Sunday, and I said we'll try and give Brian. So Brian agreed to come on this morning. We said we'd keep it mum. We wouldn't say a word to you beforehand, and we contacted Fergal through my good friend Sean Keane in Kilkenny, and Fergal is coming on, and Fergal has great stories about South Africa as well. I want to ask Brian Dobson first. Brian, working in South Africa with Sean, we'll talk about him as a presenter in a second, but working with him in South Africa during those heady days, living history.
Well, I mean, heady is absolutely the word for it. It was an extraordinary moment in world history, wasn't it? The largely peaceful transition from white minority rule to majority rule. Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk, they brokered that extraordinary deal. And Sean and I and Charlie Bird, as Sean was saying, were dispatched out in, I think it was April, May in 1994 to cover the elections to the new all-race South African Parliament. Initially, I think it was a week or two-week assignment, but the elections ran into some difficulties, as in logistically. They took quite a bit longer to complete than had been planned, so we were ordered to stay on. And such was the interest in the story, I think back home here in Ireland, that our then boss, Joe Mulholland, said, well, stay on another couple of weeks and cover the meeting of the first Parliament and the events that flowed from the election. So I certainly spent a month out there. I think Sean was there for something similar as well, and Charlie too, and we had a camera crew with us. And it was just this ringside seat for an extraordinary moment in history. And working with Sean was terrific. Because he's just such a workaholic. I mean, he just leaves no stone unturned. And he has a hunger and an appetite for the story, whatever story he's covering. And I saw that up close in South Africa during those couple of weeks. He famously got an interview with F.W. de Klerk. This is the leader of the National Party in South Africa. And he's been trying for days to see if we could pin him down. And Sean eventually discovered he was doing a canvass because it was an election in a shopping centre somewhere in Johannesburg where we were based. And off Sean went to the shopping centre and managed to pin him on an escalator as he moved from one floor of the shopping centre to the other. So there was no escape. And F.W. de Klerk, despite all his minders no doubt trying to shoo Sean away, he gave an interview to RT, an exclusive interview, which Sean was delighted to put out. I think it was on the This Week programme on the Sunday, I think we got lunchtime.
If I remember rightly, Brian, I think we got it on telly as well. I can't remember. I remember there was one interview we got, and I had no camera crew. They were working for yourself and Charlie mainly. I was there for radio, but I remember seeing a bunch of guys from Belgium, and I said, "By any chance, do you know Tommy Gorman?" And Tommy was in Brussels at the time. They said, "Of course we know Tommy Gorman." And, of course, I was in then, and the boys did the job for me, you know. We certainly got Tarbo and Becky that way.
You did get it, that's right. You got the television interview. And somebody had given us the advice that although we mightn't have had a television crew available, if we brought a tape with us, a videotape, somebody might do us a favour.
Exactly.
And it certainly worked for me a couple of times. That Belgian crew actually also helped us out on a couple of occasions. I well remember them. But it was a great. We styled ourselves, Damien, the RTE Johannesburg Bureau.
Grandiosely known as the bureau chief.
I want to bring in the Fergal Keane. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Fergal, talk to me a little bit about South Africa and also your, I suppose, respect for Sean O'Rourke.
Sean is one of the great Irish journalists of all time, not just of our time. And my respect for Sean goes back to the days when we were both. He came through a similar route that I did. Sean, begins on local newspapers in the west of Ireland. I started on a local newspaper in Limerick. Our training was very similar. It was sent out to cover all kinds of markings, as we called them in those days. Then to the Irish Press, where I went myself. And that was another fantastic training ground. And the thing that stood out for me from the very beginning about Sean was, A, his common sense, his sense of humour, and absolutely unbending integrity. And that's what's kept him at the top of the game. Great intellectual curiosity, but above all, integrity. You knew he was someone, and boy, do we need this in journalism nowadays, who would never twist news, would never indulge in fake news, would never display bias. That's the kind of standard that he set, and it's a hell of a standard for younger journalists to follow. In South Africa, Sean and the lads arrived into a situation that I was living through. I've been living there since late 1990, 1991, and it was just incredibly exciting. When in your life do you get a chance in a journalistic life to witness history in the making in that way? We're all living through history in the making in a very different way at the moment, a very negative, a very depressing way. But at that time, to be present in South Africa and to watch Nelson Mandela cast his vote, to hear him sworn in as president of a new multiracial South Africa. And when I went to South Africa, it was for RTE, for the This Week programme, back in the 1980s during the state of emergency. The idea back then that we would have seen, in less than a decade, Mandela released from prison and sworn in as president of South Africa. If you'd suggested that as a realistic possibility, people would have sent you to, a psychiatric hospital. But that's what happened, and we were all privileged to watch that.
Sean, I'm sorry for making you blush this morning on the radio. It's not a nice thing. I know the feeling is not great.
I'm not just scarlet, but I'm speechless as well.
And it's just one of those nice little things we want to do, because the three of you, I suppose, you knew you were living through history. Sean, did you that sense of feeling and broadcasting that and getting that sense of history out on the airwaves? How did you find that challenge?
Absolutely. And the other two, your other two guests this morning are guys. Pardon me. I have enormous admiration and respect for. Fergal's work speaks for itself over so many years, nationally and internationally, in RT, the Irish Press and the BBC. Brian, I think he cut his teeth initially working on Good Morning Ulster. I remember as a political correspondent for the Irish Press, talking to him, and it was the most difficult job, I would say, in broadcasting, to be an anchor on BBC Ulster at the height of the Troubles. And not only could he steer a middle course, but he could also hit a time signal. That is one of the most difficult things to do in broadcasting, is to hit a time signal in a live news program. And Dobbo could do that, and that prepared him for everything he did subsequently. But I remember as well, and I said this in the Sunday Times piece, that he we were literally about, I suppose, half an hour to air. With the live This Week out of Johannesburg, the bomb went off maybe about 10, I think it was a place called Germiston, and he was into a car out, grabbed the stuff and back, and just had the stuff on air again. That was the Northern Ireland experience, which of course Fergal has as well. If you survive that training ground, which I never really worked in myself at the guy stage, it prepared you for anything, I think, anywhere in the world. But to come back, I always remember, and I did a kind of an live commentary midnight on the 27th of April 1994, when the old flag was taken down on the flagpole at Town Hall in Johannesburg, and the old national anthem, Die Stem, was played. And I remember thinking, and I was watching a policeman who was saluting it, and he saluted the old flag, and I stood around to attention. As the old flag was taken down, the old anthem was played, and then he showed equal respect to the new anthem. I couldn't hold ukulele in Africa and the new flag going up. Utter respect, and I said, "There's great hope for this place." I remember thinking that at the time because you saw a transition, but you saw respect from one of the key forces of law and order. And obviously, the place has had its ups and downs. Huge problems remain with the economy and with crime and all the rest of it. But, you got a great sense of the human spirit and people's desire for freedom, being, you saw it in action. Certainly I think the BBC were incredibly fortunate to have Fergal there at the time, because what a wordsmith, what a reporter. He has a great way of capturing scenes and situations and articulating them. So, look, it was great to be there with those guys, career highs, memories of a lifetime, absolutely. And thank you so much for bringing those moments back.
No problem. I'm going to come back to Fergal in a second. Brian, before I let you go, because we've so much to talk to Sean about as well, before I let you go, in terms of being a wordsmith, Sean O'Rourke has been one of the best and continues to be one of the best.
He is, of course, and I think that's the newspaper training that stands to him. I never worked in papers, so I wouldn't claim anything like the same level of literate capacity that either Fergal or Sean have. But I think the other thing Sean has is he's a great quick thinker. He really can think on his feet, and in interviews he does something that's very hard to do. And you'll know this. I certainly know it. I think Fergal might as well. It's very hard sometimes to listen to what somebody's saying and to hear the important line when it's there. And because he's got such a great news sense, he's not just a great listener, but of course he can also pick up on the news line, on what somebody says that's really beginning to move a story on, something new, something that's going to make headlines. And he never misses a beat on that score. So on so many levels, he's the consummate journalist, the consummate broadcaster. It's been great to work with him over the years. We've had other stories that we covered together, and it was always a joy to watch him. And just the energy and the enthusiasm, and the hard yards that he puts in. Nothing. I mean, Sean will say nothing comes easy in life, and that applies to journalism and broadcasting as much as to anything else. And
one of the things, Fergal, finally, is modesty as well, and the idea of a journalist not getting beyond his or her station. And again, I know Sean is going scarlet, as he says this morning on this, because that's the essence of somebody, that ego is subsumed and the story comes first.
Well, that would be very typical, of course, as social anthropologists would tell you, of people from the west of Ireland. Incredibly modest. More modest than anywhere else in the country. Never once.
Not Kerrymen now, come
on. Unlike I'm a crossbreed Kerry, so I'm afraid, for sheer modesty alone, the West of Ireland bunch just get the better of it. The thing that I always remember, and Sean will remember this, when you talk about being prepared for a bigger stage, prepared for covering conflict or war, anybody who worked for the Irish press, as Sean and I did during the infamous period of Charles Huddy's premiership, learned then how to walk a fine line and how to have your wits about you. It was an extraordinary period, a truly extraordinary period. Which is, one of the things about getting old, of course, is that most young people have no memories of that. None whatsoever. But it was hugely formative for me. And the Irish press was certainly a place where you would never be allowed to get above yourself. The language was ripe and fruity, and what a fantastic training ground and a great place to work. And it's one of the experiences I most cherish in journalism.
Lovely, beautifully said. Fergal, I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much for joining us. And Brian Dobson, thank you so much for joining us. Sean, will you stay on?
Can I not go as well?
No, you can't. You have to stay for another few minutes. Fergal, thank you very much. Lovely to talk to you. God bless.
Bye-bye.
Take care. And Brian, we'll talk to you soon, okay?
Okay, Damien. Lovely to talk to you. Take care now. All the best.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Brian. Sean, will you stay with us for another few minutes if you wouldn't mind, please?
Just for you, Damien, just for you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This is lovely. And we'll have a chat about Charlie Haughey and some politicians in the southeast as well in a minute. Just stay with us.
Maybe.
I won't be able to talk to you off air, so we're just going to play a few little ads and we'll be back in a second. Thanks, Sean. Welcome back. I am joined still on the line by Sean O'Rourke. Sean, tell me, the last few days in terms of, I suppose, retirement maybe is the wrong way of putting it, because I know you're looking at coming back in some guys. How's it been for you in terms of like your feelings, and how's Caroline taking it as well?
Well, I've never presumed to speak for Miss Murphy, and I'm not going to start now. I was up early this morning, Damien, 8 o'clock, making your breakfast. Happy birthday, Caroline, if you're listening. She probably isn't, but anyway.
Happy birthday.
Look, it's been fantastic. I mean, somebody said, like, oh, you're a bit sad. No, actually. I think there's a time for everything. Now, it took me a few months to get my head around the idea of, scaling down and that sort of thing. But do you know what? Last Friday, it was like being at a one-person wedding. Cake, okay, no candles, but lots of good humour and all the rest of it. Family around, presents. I mean, unbelievable stuff. Like, the woman sent me a tea cozy. And it's a thing that's being done for charity, and it's on sale in Sandymount in Dublin. Of the pigeon house, the two red and white chimneys.
Yes,
and they're worked onto a tea cozy. So somebody else sent me a tea towel. But the two things I treasure most, okay, now, is a woman called Margaret Fitzsimons. She hung a number 2 Dublin jersey on my door last Thursday night, signed by her son Michael Fitzsimons, or Mick Fitzsimons, who they're neighbours, they're friends, and I just thought that was fantastic. And then yesterday, an old friend of ours, a former colleague, that certainly Fergal and Dobbo, I don't know if you would remember Fintan Drury, he was one of the first presenters of the morning, and landed up with a signed Hurley from the Canning and workshop, signed by Joe Canning. And that was just fantastic to get. And lots of other stuff. I mean, there's a veritable lake of champagne waiting to be consumed. And some other stuff in bottles and books and all the rest of it. I must have had about 500 cards. Now, I mean, in the era of emails and text and all the rest of it, I just cannot believe just the good wishes and affection and thoughtfulness of people. I mean, I'm going to have to spend some, well, I won't say weeks, but a considerable time replying insofar as people have left addresses and that kind of thing. So, I've had a lovely time, and then I've been out in my greenhouse, and a couple of raised beds out the back, sort of poking around, and I've had I'm like, if this is retirement based on the first 3 days, I can take plenty of it.
We don't have any more ambushes for you now, so don't worry. I contacted our old friend Ray Burke last night, and he said, ask Sean, did he play football or hurling when growing up?
I played a bit of both, but actually my main sport was rowing.
Yes, that's right. I read that somewhere. Yeah,
and I was a schoolboy oarsman, and that was what we did. The school was no good at football or hurling. I mean, I played once in Tuam Stadium. This is the height of the pinnacle, the C division, Connacht colleges under 16, right? The Jez boys, the Townies, versus the horny-handed sons of toil from Headford, right? Tech. When I tell you, we were beaten by 16 goals and 15 points to nothing. I am telling you now, one word of a lie. We got the ball into their half twice. but you know what? I graced the greensward of Tuam Stadium, where men like John Donlan and Noel Tierney and Johnny Gersey and Patty Donlan, and I could name them all. Martin Hughes, Cody McDonough would have starred, and without the crowd rising. And thank God there was nobody there to see us in our day of defeat that day.
Talk to me a little bit about politicians in the southeast and those that you may have interviewed that stand out.
Yeah, well, at the risk of sounding like an old F, whatever, you know. I mean, I would go back as far. I remember the likes of Jackie Fahey saying Eddie Collins, the people like that. Yes. I wouldn't claim to have known them particularly well. I suppose the first one I got to know, because I was kind of turned loose on politics by the Sunday Press nearly 40 years ago, sort of September 1980. Austin Deise. And he was kind of a pal. He was a grumpy so-and-so, but he was dead sound. I mean, like, what you saw was what you got.
Yes.
And if he was a bit sort of miffed with you, well, you got that too. I mean, I think the apple didn't fall too far from the tree in the case of John as well. And I remember, like, Deise, he was a bit of a critic of Garrett, like, and Garrett left him out of his first cabinet. And I remember interviewing Deise in Powers Hotel, and he made some remark. He said, talking about whatever the government had done, it was a bit of a debacle, and I started to laugh. And you know the way you laugh and you can't stop laughing. And he says, "What's wrong?" He said, "That's just the way you pronounce that word. You know, it was debacle, I think it was." And that became a kind of running joke, and has been for 40 years between myself and David Davenport. It's a bit of a debacle of what's going on. And then there'd be people, you know, you would have come across like, you know, sort of Donny Ormond and Anne, the senator, and I didn't know the Keneallys that well, but John Halligan, I mean, he was sort of like of more recent times. John Halligan lit up many a morning for us. I'm sure as he did for you, Damien,
yes.
on the Today with Sean Rourke program on RT Radio 188.5, 89.1 for people who want to where to find it. And so, I mean, like, he was the real deal as well, you know. Like, he didn't hold back. If something on his mind, he said it, you know. And
yeah.
that was what I liked about him.
And that's so important to try and get that out. Like, I was reading the interview you did in the Irish Times, and right at the end you say, "I'm still waiting for the perfect interview. I've done 32,000 or whatever." You always look back and say, if I've just pressed a little more. But the interviews that you've done, you do them on the basis of the questions that are there and people that are there, and you coax them and you get them out, and you try to get, I suppose, the listener to come away knowing something more about the person.
Yeah, and like a lot of the time, particularly with politicians, I mean, you know, you're not necessarily going to get the answers that, you know, are the full story. I mean, I remember when I was in the Irish press, I was political correspondent there for 5 years. I did 2 years in RTE, and then I got this job as political correspondent, probably earlier than I was ready for it. But I remember coming to the conclusion very quickly that, by and large, the media do not know what is going on. They know what the politicians or government is prepared to tell them, but and I remember though somebody saying, quoting, I think it was Malcolm Muggeridge, a famous writer, saying, you know, the media is like a shoal or a school of sharks swimming along behind the ship of state, and they're living on whatever scraps are thrown overboard. But he said every so often the whole ship goes down and they get a right good feast for themselves. And I think that can happen as well. But yeah, I mean, on the interviews thing, you try to get a sense of, like, what does the ordinary person, what does the person sitting, you know, in Bracken's Bar in Kinnegad want to know? Or, you know, I'm sure, you know, there's pubs down in Passage or wherever, where there's the guys, you know, and they're sort of just full of common sense. They can see through the media, they can see through the politicians very easily. And occasionally you would hit pay dirt. I mean, what Dobson was saying is important, or Fergal, the importance of listening. But I remember when Bertie became Taoiseach for the last time, 2007, I mean, it was clear that it was going to be his last run. He had won a third election, slightly against the run of play the last one. And he came over, we did a no-B with the News at 1 in Buswell's that day, and he'd just been re-elected Taoiseach. And I said to him, I thought about, I was completely chancing my arm, but I said, sure, I'll ask it anyway. And I said, I suppose it's going to be your last one. And I said, you know, there's a kind of a feeling around, and I just wonder, do you see it this way yourself? Now I'm paraphrasing, that your natural successor is Brian Cowan. That in the same way that you know, De Valera's natural successor was Sean Lemass, Brian Cowan would be yours. And normally, you know, you'd expect him to say, "Oh, well, no, that's down the road, and like that's not for me. That'd be for the parliamentary party at the time." He actually says, "Yeah, I think that's probably fair enough." And he basically, it was kind of a laying on of hands on Brian Cowan as the successor. And there was no contest, if you remember, afterwards.
That's right.
And a lot of guys were really cheesed off. And I was just amazed. And talking about Davenport, I mean, I do hold this against him. He was on straight after that. He says, "Oh yeah, Brian Cowan, the natural successor. Nothing new there." I mean, I tell you, when I didn't hit him, a right dig. I mean, there was no social distance within just about the right range, you know, to give him but anyway, that's, you know, these things happen. Broadcasting.
Are you going to write a book?
Now, there's a good question. I don't know.
You should.
I always remember a friend of mine wrote a book and asked me to launch it, and I was driving down to launch it. Shall we say, well, somewhere outside the Pale, I better not say where.
Okay.
I got into the aforementioned Joe Bracken for the usual cup of tea on the way. He says, so-and-so's written a book. He says, and you're along. He says, geez, he's written a book. He says, who the hell would want to read that? So, it's a bit, I think it's unlikely. I mean, I might write a book about something else, but I don't think I'll write a book about me. Who the hell would want to read it?
Well, I know, but again, modesty comes into it. I mean that genuinely, and it's a pleasure to have you on. Sean, we'd have so much to talk about, but we've run over time dramatically, as you know yourself, when it comes to these things.
I'll be back now. There's a few places I need to be. I haven't taken off from Faith's leg, despite my good pal down there, Mel Morgan, promising. I hear Tremor is very nice as well.
It is.
And I do hope to go back to Ballymacarbery. It's Ballymacarbery, is it? Honora's Cottage.
That's right. We only had her on yesterday talking about brown bread and soda bread. Oh, it's beautiful, isn't it?
Well, no, I have every intention of going down there to her and learn how to make the nicest brown bread. And you know, she has a grandson. I think his name is Kennedy.
Yes.
Shamey Kennedy, would he be?
Yeah.
Tipperary hurler.
That's right. Fair play to you.
I said to her, now, who would you be cheering for? If the days were plenty. Well, she says, if Shamey's on the team, I'll be just about cheering for Tip, but if he's not picked... Without finishing the sentence, you kind of knew where she stood. She's a mighty woman, and it's a beautiful, beautiful part of the world, so I'm on the way back whenever circumstances permit.
Super. Sean, God bless. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Good talking to you, Damien.
Thank you, Sean.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Sean O'Rourke there. Thank you so much for talking to us, Sean. Stay with us. Now, Catherine Donnelly from the Irish Independent is going to join us in a second. Keep your texts and your comments coming in. 083 333 975. Text or WhatsApp. You can call Laura on 051. Audrey even on 051 846 123. One of Sean O'Rourke's finest interviews, says Noel, was the day he interviewed his old colleague and friend George Lee on the News at 1 when he was going to run as a Fine Gael candidate in the by-election, and then he chose when he went back to RTE, and he gave him a roasting. Well done. A true professional. A lovely interview there with Sean, and great to hear Brian Dobson and Fergal Keane as well, says another texter. Catherine Donnelly, good morning.
Good morning, Damien.
Thank you so much for joining us. Irish Independent education correspondent. We're going to talk briefly about Leaving Cert issues, and tuition for all Leaving Cert students has actually ceased. I think it was yesterday, Julie, our producer, was saying students are now banned from discussing their grades or class rankings with the teachers. Is this right?
That's right. But as you know, the Minister made the announcement on Friday that the Leaving Cert, as we know it, isn't happening, and they're moving to a system of calculated grades, although there will be an opportunity to sit a Leaving Cert at some date that hasn't yet been determined, but it's November is the very earliest, I think, that they're talking about. So arising from that, there was a decision made that there shouldn't really be any further contact between teachers and students. I think Monday, there was probably a bit of tidying up done in schools on Monday in terms of having a final chat with their students because the announcement on Friday would have come, too late for schools to have signed off. So I think there was an opportunity on Monday to do that. But there's been no further contact. So tuition ceased on Monday, and there's been no further contact not so much contact, no discussion between teachers and the sixth-year students about their performance to date, or indeed what the teacher may think that they're going to sort of how he or she is going to grade them. But there's been no discussion on that since last Monday. But schools can continue to offer support in areas such as well-being to students, and obviously that is important because it's been sixth year is difficult for students anyway. This year has been particularly difficult, so there will be students who will need other support from the schools, so that's okay. But just once they don't discuss grades or their marks, that's that. Yeah, there's
still so many unanswered questions, regarding this, and over the fairness, transparency of the calculated grade system, as well as possible legal vulnerabilities, which may come back to haunt the government. What's your general sense of things at the minute, Catherine, in terms of how it's been received? I know there's a relief that a decision has been made, so we know where we're going on this. But what's your feeling?
Well, last weekend, in the run-up to this, the Irish second level Student Union, which has been very active on this front and which has been involved in the advisory group in the Department of Education, they conducted 2 surveys of sixth-year students in the last couple of months. And they did one over the May Bank holiday weekend, which would have been, that's about a week or so ago, 10 days ago. And in that poll, 79% of sixth-year students said they, at this point, with the ongoing uncertainty, they would prefer a system of calculated grades. Now, that's gone up from sort of between 49 and 58% from a poll that had been conducted by the same second-level Students' Union about a month earlier. So as the uncertainty continued, we were getting closer to deadlines, and no guarantee at all that the July 29 start could happen. The students themselves were veering more towards the idea of calculated grades just to give certainty. There was another important piece of work published last week, the same day as the Minister made his announcement. The National Educational Psychological Service, these would be the school psychologists, they have been monitoring the situation since schools closed, and they produced a paper last week in which they outlined their findings about, how the situation was evolving and how students were dealing with it. And they outlined issues around, as we know, things like the digital divide and the fact that not all students had access to broadband, and not all students had access to a laptop or some other device that would allow them continue with learning at home, and other issues. There are other students that would be vulnerable for one reason or another, and who weren't faring as well under this online teaching and learning that has been in place since March 13. And their ultimate advice was that at this point, calculated grades was the way to go in the interest of student well-being and giving certainty to students. So I think so. They were 2 powerful voices. And plus, you had teaching principals as well looking for certainty. So all the people who are closest to this at the cold face all wanted certainty. None of them think. I know there's been complaints about the Leaving Cert over the years. People say, the sort of the brutal but fair sort of characterisation of it. But that sort of holds in the sense that people feel overall it is fair. It's a lot of people don't like it, but it is sort of at a level it seems to be fair. And there was everybody. It seemed most people would have preferred the traditional exams to have gone ahead, but when it came to it, and increasingly the view was that they weren't going to happen, and people couldn't live with the uncertainty, and it was unfair to be asking 18 and 19-year-olds to be trying to study for exams that may or may not happen.
Yeah, I think
that's where we're at now.
I think you're right. Catherine, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, Damien, thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Catherine Donnelly there, Irish Independent education correspondent. We'll come back to that topic, maybe not later this week, but certainly early next week, because there's so much to discuss with that. Got some texts in from teachers and from pupils and many parents as well, so we will come back to that topic. Next, we're going to talk about a very important matter, childcare provision for healthcare workers. This is vital, particularly when people are looking at returning to work, some people next week. Now, keep your texts and comments coming in 083 33 975. I'll get to more of them in a minute. Firstly, I want to go straight to Regina Bushell. Good morning, Regina.
Good morning, Damien. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. You're chair of SHAS SUAS. It's the representative body for independent early learning and care. That's ELC providers in Ireland. Childcare provision for healthcare workers, very important, particularly ahead of next week. Over 50% of parents say they can't go back to work if their child's creche doesn't open. What's your thoughts on this?
Well, obviously, I think that there has been good coverage around the frontline workers and supporting them. We have always said we'd be able to do it within our centres, and as you know now, there is definite problem there with insurance and I suppose employment law and other difficulties have arisen over it. And we're waiting for clarification on a number of those issues. SHAS SUAS have written to the Minister Sapone and DCYA, and I know that they have had huge challenges with this. They have been working extremely hard in DCYA offices around it, But unfortunately, a number of things seem to have arisen that's outside everyone's control. So we'll wait to see what's happening on that one. With regards to the roller coaster survey with children or parents not being able to return to work, this is a real concern for all of us. And again, Chef Lewis is working with DCYA on this, on the whole thing of reopening. It is going to be hugely challenging for providers. On saying that childcare facilities are well used to putting protective protocols in place for children's health and safety. And obviously, all the providers in the country have worked to ensure that children can return safely. But one of the biggest issues for providers there is going to be the whole sustainability. If we look at the social distancing aspect and how that's going to be done, that's going to bring its own difficulties and challenges for us. But there's also the challenge in how services will be sustained during this time.
OK, let's talk, sorry for interrupting, let's talk practicalities here. I was talking to a woman the other day and she wants to go back to work next week, but her creche cannot get insurance from their insurance company to go into this person's house to actually mind the child. So she's not going to be able to go back to work next week.
And that, I know she won't be able to go back to work. It is extremely challenging. There are a number of parents who are actually continued working and they have no childcare either. And we're getting many requests from a number of parents who are actually in work and have continued to work and are trying to juggle their childcare what they need with regards to childcare, maybe between two jobs or one job in a family. It's extremely difficult. It's very challenging. And at the same time, we're looking at maybe, that the creches have stayed open in other countries. And I just briefly saw something coming in today saying that children were not particularly carriers of the virus. So, like what we have been saying all along is that we want to keep our centres open. We need methods to look at it and the HSE across all the provisions and all the dates for the reopening phases and see if there's anything we can do to get open earlier.
Let's talk again practicalities, Regina. What can be done? Like, what can be done in that situation? Are you looking at forcing insurance companies? Insurance companies will say, no, we have our criteria for assessing risk and matters such as that, and we cannot provide insurance. Are you looking at the government providing insurance, or do you think the solution is to reopen creches quicker?
Well, at this point in time, we have been in constant contact with the insurance companies. Providers have contacted the insurance companies, and we have been told, no, we won't be covered. So are we going to draw a line under that and sort of say, well, right, then how can we open it in our centres to provide that? Because in fairness, if we're within our centres, staff have support. They need support within centres themselves. They need to be able to have their breaks. And what happens if somebody got sick and they were in somebody's house? It is not just about insurance. There are a number of things where it is much safer to provide this service within a creche environment. And maybe for frontline staff only, we have looked at the practicalities of maybe where you have bigger centres, and we all know we have bigger and smaller centres all around the country. Full day care we're talking about here. And some of them may be able to divide up rooms where they might be able to take those children of families into one room and have them within that one room. As I say, it is extremely complicated. It is not, as will be reopening for everybody, be very, very complicated. Like the government can't do, I know that, hello?
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah, no, I'm listening. I'm listening intently because I hear what you're saying, and we're outlining the problems. But again, the solution is not apparent.
No, there isn't. It doesn't seem to be a solution there. The government aren't and can't indemnify our insurance policies, and the providers are expected to remain the employers in this. And we can't take that responsibility of putting our staff into situations where they're not insured. And that's, it's an overall I think that we had looked to be involved in these conversations from the beginning, and unfortunately we weren't. I can say that we will be involved and Chassuas will be involved in the conversations about returning to getting services up and running again with the DCYA. Yes. And that is vitally important because we have a lot of expertise to offer. And in this case, we weren't. In the last case, we weren't included. We're hoping to be included and will be included in this.
The next one,
but it isn't. It isn't just all about insurance, and it's getting all of our parents back to work because they need childcare to do that, and we're willing to work however way we can to ensure that happens. But we have to be sustainable as well. And obviously, I know all businesses are in difficulties at the moment, which is very, frustrating and stressful for people who own their own businesses.
Regina, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Not at all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Regina Bushell there, Chair of Chassuas. Let us know what you think. People are texting in. Can grandparents help out if their health allows them? If he left the grandmothers mind the grandchildren, these people would not have such a problem, would be able to work. Stay with us.